So looks like everything is okay.
Yes, Marshall, we can hear you.
You can't hear me? Good. Okay.
Yes, in about 3 minutes, I will present you, and then
2 minutes.
you can start with your presentation.
Okay. So you can see my slides and you can hear me okay. Is the volume
Yes.
okay and it's clear?
We mark the time, okay?
Okay.
2 minutes, please.
Okay. Okay.
Julio, buenos días. Yo haré la presentación para el profesor Marshall y mi compañera Mili estará haciendo la traducción simultánea.
Pues muchísimas gracias por su paciencia y también por su presencia. Vamos a continuar ahora con la presentación a cargo del doctor Marshall Breeding, quien es consultor independiente de la American Library Association, que abordará el tema Tecnologías de biblioteca para la crisis de COVID-19 y más allá. Nos acompaña con la moderación y la traducción de esta presentación la señora Mili Bugarín, quien es miembro del área de capacitación y consultoría en ProQuest Ex Libris. Adelante, Mili, por favor, and thank you very much, Mr. Marshall Breeding.
Welcome.
Adelante, Mili, por favor.
Buenos días. César Gallego, soy responsable del área de Mercadotecnia para América Latina en ProQuest Ex Libris, y mi compañera Mili Bugarín, quien es Training and Consulting Partner también aquí en ProQuest Ex Libris, estará haciendo la traducción de la presentación. Para aquellos usuarios que están conectados a través de Zoom, pueden seleccionar en el botón de interpretación, en el menú de Zoom, la opción de español para escuchar la pista. Y para los que están conectados a través de YouTube, solamente tendremos disponible el audio en inglés. A continuación, quisiera darles la bienvenida, agradecer su participación y presentarles al profesor Marshall Breeding, quien nos hablará sobre la tecnología de bibliotecas para la crisis de COVID-19 y más allá. Marshall Breeding es consultor independiente, escritor y conferencista. Es el creador y editor de Library Technology Guides y el directorio global de bibliotecas libraries.org. Escribe la columna mensual Bibliotecario de Sistemas, que aparece en la revista especializada Computers in Libraries. También es editor para el Boletín de Bibliotecas Inteligentes, publicado por la Asociación Norteamericana de Bibliotecas, ALA. Es autor del reporte anual de sistemas de biblioteca que aparece en Library Journal desde 2002 y en American Libraries desde 2014. Marshall ha escrito y editado 8 libros, el último de ellos sobre tecnologías en la nube para bibliotecas. De 1985 a 2012, fue director de investigación e innovación tecnológica para la red de bibliotecas de la Universidad de Vanderbilt en Nashville, Tennessee, y fue director ejecutivo de Vanderbilt Television News Archive. El profesor Marshall ofrece de manera regular talleres y presentaciones sobre tecnologías de biblioteca en diversos países. En 2008 trabajó en Córdoba, Argentina, en calidad de especialista Fulbright de alta calificación. En 2009 condujo talleres de digitalización en Quibdó, Medellín y Bogotá, en Colombia, como parte de un proyecto sobre archivos en peligro financiado con una donación de la Biblioteca Británica. Sin más, los dejo con el profesor Marshall Brady.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure to be here today virtually to speak to this important conference of libraries in Mexico and beyond. I'm happy to have this opportunity. I hope to be able to return to travel to Mexico again sometime, but for now, we will have to settle for virtual presentations. So I'm going to be talking a lot about different themes in technology. Technology obviously is the area of my interest and expertise. So I will try to tie it into some of the issues that libraries are facing with the current pandemic crisis, but it also kind of fits well within some of the general themes in technology that are happening in libraries across the world anyway. When I speak to international audience and even to audiences of librarians here in the US, I really try to be careful to understand the context of the library community to which I'm speaking. That, libraries are different all around the world. Different types of libraries have different needs. They serve their communities in different ways and in different geographic areas. There are obviously differences in culture and language and economic resources that really have to be taken into consideration. So just to say that I try to be sensitive to those differences, and there really isn't one single approach that will serve libraries of all kinds in all the world. So we just try to make sure that we find the technologies, the processes, and so forth that are best suited to the libraries. Okay, so I mentioned that I manage this Library Technology Guides website. That is where you'll find a lot of the information and the data that's related to this talk and others that I give. I invite you to visit for further information. There'll be a lot of information about libraries and different types of reports and visualizations and so forth that can be found there that are related to the talks that I give. The Library Technology Reports is a report that I give, that I write every year, as was mentioned, and it's been published in Library Journal and American Libraries. The latest version, kind of fresh opportunities among consolidation, was the latest edition of that. And most years there is a Spanish translation. And so this year I worked with Julio Alonso Arevalo to help me with the translation. I understand he'll be speaking at this conference tomorrow. So he's been a good colleague and very helpful in, translating, this article and others in the past too. And you can get to the Spanish version through the links that I provide here. So anyway, I'm glad to be able to have versions of my articles in different languages, especially in Spanish. I do a survey every year to libraries to try to understand their views of the automation systems they use. And one of the languages that I offer that survey in is in Spanish. So don't be surprised when you get an email from me inviting you to respond to my survey. I do try to collect data about libraries all around the world. The data is held in this libraries.org website that was mentioned. It is a database essentially of over 200,000 libraries in different parts of the world. And I do try to collect data in as much detail in as many countries as I can. Mexico is one of the countries where I hope to improve the data that I have. I do have a lot of libraries represented, but mostly just as placeholders, even though there are 6,541 Spanish libraries in the database. There are really only a few that have complete data, including the automation systems and the other data that helps me understand the trends in technology. But there's lots of other Spanish content on the website, a lot of press releases and reports that are in Spanish, both translations that international companies issue, and then some companies that I follow operate in Latin America and in Spain, so their announcements are in Spanish. So anyway, I have an interest in doing more of that, to gathering more data in Spain. So always looking for either individuals and libraries to contribute data or to help me identify data sets that would have more systematic information about libraries in Mexico. So going more to the topic at hand, I want to talk about some of the trends that I see happening related to technology in libraries, focusing mostly on public and academic libraries. I think these trends apply more broadly. And also keeping in mind that I think that technology happens differently in public and academic libraries. And it's also, these technology trends that the current crisis fits into. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about, um, these broader trends before we talk about some of the more current issues. Academic libraries obviously have a lot of changes in the last decade or two. This is nothing new, that academic libraries have seen a fundamental transition from print to electronic journals as they get content related to scholarly communications, and that even beyond this transition to electronic, there are other transitions happening from subscription model to open access model, including the more recent transformative agreements, kind of pay to uh, for publish and access. So those business arrangements are getting more and more complex. Uh, the technology cycles are changing differently in academic libraries than public. More movement toward broad platforms with API ecosystems and so forth, and this general transition from integrated library systems to library services platforms I'll talk a bit more about later, which has really made a big difference in a lot of academic libraries around the world. The main issue is that public academic libraries are really focused on managing complex collections of electronic resources with print resources at the same time. Print has not at all gone away from any kinds of libraries. So a lot of different business requirements. So this transition from print to digital is really fundamental. Let me just show you a couple of slides in a second that kind of emphasize that. But this change has brought the need for new technology systems that are designed from the ground up to be able to manage electronic resources in a way that the legacy integrated library systems have not been able to do. Just showing a couple of slides here, one that you see the red that represents the spending and collection budgets related to subscriptions, the majority of collection budgets for academic libraries. And this is all libraries in the US. So again, I know your proportions may vary, but this is kind of what I'm seeing in most library types around the world, is more and more spending on electronic resources and less on print. And then conversely, the use of electronic resources has gone up dramatically. And then the circulation of print materials has fallen dramatically. So, those are just really important trends that we have to take in mind as we think about technology. So there have been these new generation of systems, mostly adopted by academic libraries. in order to be able to manage this change. Having systems that were designed for managing print resources isn't going to be effective when today academic libraries are mostly managing electronic resources. So we really need stronger tools, stronger knowledge bases, discovery services in order to be able to accommodate that fundamental difference. There's a new genre of software that academic libraries are adopting in most parts of the world. We call them library services platforms. These are not just, the next version of an integrated library system, but really a new architecture and design, uh, uh, for these new systems. They are obviously library focused. They're built on services and APIs, and they're deployed as kind of modern global platforms in the same way that social media is, a single platform that's used by many different types of organizations and users. And then they have this new flavor of functionality. Manages print, electronic, digital resources, replaces a multitude of products behind the scenes for each library, and has more flexible tools for managing metadata. But also what's important is that it's built into these kind of knowledge bases, eJournal Holdings knowledge bases, bibliographic databases, and usually connections with discovery tools with broad-based discovery indexes that libraries need in order to be able to manage their collections. Again, I'll say a little bit more about that later on, but again, the point is that, academic libraries have really seen a change in the kinds of systems that they implement. Public libraries continue to mostly deal with print resources. The majority of public library collections go to print. They also have ebook lending and so forth, but it's still majority print. The integrated library system continues to prosper in public libraries because it really is well adapted to deal with mostly print collections. Some extensions, some new features are being integrated into these systems in order to be able to accommodate the rising use of ebooks. But still, the kinds of systems remain a little bit more continuous than what we've seen in the academic arena. So public libraries, especially in large cities and urban areas, really work hard to be able to keep up with demand in order to be able to keep up with millions of requests a year for transactions a year for circulation and so forth. So there are a lot of technologies that are well used in public libraries, a lot of self-service, both for returns and for loans, automated material handling, central sorting, new processes related to floating collections, where in multi-branch systems, items can move from one branch to another. You borrow it in one and return it to another, and it's fine that they stay in that facility. It just adds to the kind of mix of collection materials available to each branch. So those are just big, obvious trends that are happening in libraries already. So we have seen an abrupt change in the recent months. Since January, February, March of this year, libraries have had, dramatic responses to the global pandemic. They're changes that some libraries were better prepared for than others. But I think that regardless, these changes that libraries are dealing with now will help us think and prepare for the future as we look forward to what is often called the new normality, the new normal. So there has been an abrupt change away from physical services. When libraries have to close, then the physical materials that libraries have available, have in their collection simply are not available to the community members that use them. So libraries have had to do things like suspend the status of all the borrowed materials, and then try to set up some type of service request so that users can get access to materials, at least in a limited way. We're seeing a lot of kind of touchless pickup arrangements where you can order materials through the library's catalog or website and have them ready to be picked up when you come and visit the library without having to actually come into the library. That's for the libraries that have not fully opened their physical facilities yet. In the US and in other countries, some libraries have already reopened. We're doing so in limited ways, but still, I think we're still at the point where that is not happening broadly. So it's meant much more of a focus on digital resources. Libraries of all kinds have already had access to digital resources, but it's meant reinvigorating those collections, trying to add more content, as much content as possible, since access to the printed materials just isn't available. So how do you do that? How do you find the financial resources to purchase more materials when they're licensed? How can you identify more open access materials in order to make those available? And then are there new processes that you can use in order to make materials available digitally to library users? There's been a lot of activity and some controversy related to the concept of controlled digital lending, where libraries scan entire books from their collections. They then lend those digital scans to their users, even if the item is still under copyright. The idea is that the print version is held back from circulation, so only the digital copy is lent, and the digital copy is lent to only one user at a time. So this view of controlled digital lending respects the same level of access as lending a print book. The Internet Archive, HathiTrust, and other organizations that have large digital collections have been following that practice. The controversy has been with the Internet Archive in particular, where due to the crisis, they allowed broader access to those digital copies. There's a lot to be said about that, and even some legal issues that are currently going on in litigation regarding to that arrangement. So we'll also see that libraries are working harder in order to be able to reach their community members, their users, during these times where they may not be able to come use the physical facilities. And we're also seeing that a lot of libraries are making long-term or maybe even permanent changes to the way that they build their collections, choosing to buy more electronic copies and fewer digital copies. So that is not a surprising outcome. So again, the crisis will have kind of a long-term impact on libraries. So there's a lot of some technologies that libraries are working with to try to reduce risk while maintaining service. A lot of these are technologies that are frequently used in public libraries, especially, and also academic libraries, where the more that can be done to handle materials automatically instead of having humans handle them is a good thing. So more and more automated material handling, sorting systems, and so forth. And then many libraries have programmed their automation systems to respect the quarantine periods that are needed. Once users have had material, return them to the library. Typically, these items are held in quarantine for 3 to 5 days in order to make sure that any remnants of virus contamination, for example, ages out before they're handled by library workers. So you can build those parameters into your automation systems. So more self-service, let users check out their own materials. You can do that even in a somewhat safer way through an app on the user's mobile phone where they can kind of check out the material directly without having to touch library provided equipment. More libraries are installing people counters in order to be able to control how many visitors come into the library at any given time. There are a lot of municipalities and so forth that are allowing facilities like libraries to open, but only with limited capacity. You can only allow a third or a half of the usual occupancy numbers into the building at this time in order to be able to maintain, safe social distancing. And then other things that can be done. One example that I'm familiar with are equipment that uses UV light in order to be able to sanitize books. I don't see these in widespread use outside of Asia, but here's a picture of one that I took when I was visiting Taiwan a few years ago, where ultraviolet light is sent through every page of the book using where the pages are separated through airstream in order to be able to send UV light to every page. So don't really see a lot of that, but we may see more of that in the future. Libraries are, so as more community members are required to learn from home, to stay at home, that really enhances a lot of the problems that are in society with kind of uneven access to technology. So this digital divide that is present in society all over the world, including the U.S., is especially difficult during current times. And libraries are doing as much as they can in order to provide a positive impact there. How can libraries help society, help their community members that don't have the technology equipment, they don't have the internet access, so that they will need as education becomes online, as people need to apply for new jobs, new training, all of that requires technology that, isn't in every home. So libraries have been doing this for a long time, but I think many have increased their efforts to lend equipment, tablets, laptops, Wi-Fi hotspots, so that at least within the limited numbers of items that a library can keep to lend, it can help those most needing it to have these kind of devices. And then in a more scalable way, libraries can offer programs where they can help community members with better digital literacy, to better understand the technologies that are needed in order to be able to take advantage of online education and other online services that they are especially dependent on during these times. Online learning is especially a big movement now, where in-person education is less of an option. Many schools now are trying to bring back students to campuses with mixed results. So libraries have to rethink and improve and shift the ways that they support online learning in school and higher education, in order to be able to ensure that the instructors and the students have all the resources that they need. It's not a new role for libraries, but certainly is a role that libraries are having to amplify and accelerate in these recent months. A lot of the materials that libraries may have had previously for may have been print. So how do you reproduce those in electronic formats? The licensing for many of these materials is very challenging, where libraries may not be able to even purchase the kinds of licenses that are needed for widespread use in the classroom. This is really strengthening the movement toward open educational resources, so that there are kind of low cost, high quality educational resources available to instructors and students as they go to online learning. So, we talk a lot about the new normal. I don't know of many folks that are thinking that society is going to return anytime soon to the way things were last year. It's unlikely that the pandemic is going to end quickly, and that this impact will be pretty long lasting, maybe for months, maybe for years. And there are lots of different ways that libraries are going to have to navigate a really enduring change, maybe permanent change. So my main thinking about this is that this crisis is an important event in the history of library technology, but it's also one that I think plays into some of these trends that have already been played out. It's going to accelerate some trends. It may bend them a little bit, but it's a lot of the technology trends that were happening anyway will help libraries navigate the future under this new type of normal. Talk about a couple of trends is that the obvious one is that there will be increased emphasis on electronic content, digital services, the skills and capacity that libraries gain to meet the current crisis will obviously have enduring value. Personalized services, how do you more finely hone the way that libraries deliver their services to meet the individual needs of library users, taking into consideration a lot of different factors other than the fact that they are a library user. What's their demographic status? What languages do they speak? What are their specific interests and needs, and how can the library best fill those? And then, how do libraries do more with less? It's obvious that library budgets are going to be challenged. How can libraries offer more impact for their collections and services, given that they're going to have fewer financial resources in the future in order to be able to carry out their missions? So I want to walk through a couple of those main themes and how I see them playing out in the future. So an important theme that I've been talking about for a few years anyway is really the idea of collaborative infrastructure. This, I think, we'll see more of, that libraries in different parts of the world have already been moving toward sharing systems in ways that provide access of more collection materials to broader groups of library users. Moving away from this model of every library implementing their own system with their own collection and just being kind of simply self-sufficient. It's great to be self-sufficient, but it's better if you can collaborate with other libraries in order to be able to provide more collection materials to your users that can be requested and delivered very quickly. And that I don't think libraries really have the luxury to, live with kind of standalone automation systems that, are expensive to operate and that have very limited capabilities for providing access to broader collections. So there are more and more groups of libraries that are doing that. It's really a big trend in the United States, Europe, Australia, and other countries. It gives libraries a lot of capability that it's hard to have when you have your own individual standalone system. How do you do collaborative collection development when you're working with your peers, so that one library can specialize in a certain type of material, certain type of language, and depend on others for other areas and languages? Do we have collaborative collections? How do you provide fast access to those collections from your users from other libraries, and your peer institutions, how they get access to your materials quickly? Gives libraries opportunities to rethink about the way they manage their internal services. What types of language skills, what types of subject skills does each library need to have in order to be able to process materials? So the idea of shared infrastructure gives libraries a lot more flexibility in the way they organize those services. So I think there are really a lot of benefits, one of which is that it can really result in less cost per institution. That, when every library is having to bear the full burden of providing automation systems, it really kind of takes away from resources that could be channeled toward other valuable services. So I want to kind of show you some pictures that I developed in the last few days that kind of illustrate that thought. So the one here shows kind of the idea of a single library operating its own library management system with its own user and collection data. It's fully functional and can well serve the users of its own community, but it doesn't go beyond that very well. And it's also kind of the most expensive and the least efficient model of providing automation to a library. And it can be a big library. It can have a large library system with lots of different branches. So it's not that these systems, don't serve a large number of users. They can, but again, it's the silo of automation and content that does not have the flexibility and collaboration that I think libraries need. But there are scenarios where an institution like a university may have multiple libraries, each with their own system within that. So, this I think is, an even more difficult arrangement where the same institution is supporting multiple implementations of an automation system, and even within a single campus. There's difficulty in getting access and knowledge about collections that are held across a library system. So one of the big trends in recent years has been the consolidation of libraries within universities, so that those consolidate into a central single library system. So when you think about it globally, there are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of implementations of standalone systems that really mean a lot of inefficient and replicated efforts of installing systems. Consortia can work together. Like I said before, really large numbers of libraries and users can share an ILS, integrated library system, but there are definite limits in how far that can go. So, there comes a point where there's just too much replication, there's too many silos, and there are opportunities for libraries to work together in a different way in order to be able to share systems, share data, and to truly collaborate in the way that they implement technology. So in the same way that we all participate in broad social networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, where we're all using the same platform, millions, if not billions of users sharing information with each other. And, lots of other business models like using platforms like Salesforce, which many commercial businesses rely on. Well, this is coming to the library world in the form of these library services platforms where, this is a platform that may be distributed globally through many different data centers, but offers the same kind of look, functionality, and data to all the libraries and their respective users, in a more efficient way. Kind of baked into these platforms are the ability to share data, to do resource sharing, to be able to operate in much more efficient ways. And there's kind of a continually evolving software behind these platforms. So, these platforms can scale globally. As new libraries join, the incremental computing power and so forth is, just continues to be provided by those managing the platform. So I think that this is really the more modern and forward-looking approach of providing automation to libraries as opposed to the individual separate automation systems that we see that have happened before now. So I think it's important to look at this, maybe even in Mexico and in other countries in Latin America and so forth, where the dominant model now is individual systems. Are there opportunities to gain impact for libraries through sharing systems? A lot of large organizations have come together to participate in these platforms in collaborative ways. This is just a small list of the ones that I'm aware of that I follow, and a lot of these are very large institutions. Don't want to talk about them each individually, but again, this is happening more in the academic library space than public library space so far. But I think it's an important technology trend to be aware of as you think about how can technology best serve libraries into the future. So provides this opportunity for resource sharing. Is kind of built into the system. How can you provide access to your users of not just hundreds of thousands or 1 million volumes that a large academic library would have on its own, but rather tens of millions of and beyond items that would be the potential universe of material that's available to library users. So I just think that collaboration is essential as libraries, think about their future, that there's technologies available to help them do that, but it's more the orientation to do that, if libraries continually think about, let's not think about just how to implement technology on our own, but how can we implement technology and platforms and systems in ways that help the broader library community within their country, area, state, whatever, so that libraries can work together, can collaborate on behalf of their community members. There are lots of advantages to do that. So sure there'll be more questions about that. The other topic that I want to mention that I see playing out has to do with engagement and personalization, that we're used to libraries interacting with their users in fairly straightforward ways. Library profiles that are oriented essentially to the circulation of their integrated library system. So you can contact them when a book is available, when materials are due or overdue, be able to let patrons make requests on items, put holds, and so forth in order to be able to kind of manage these transactions that libraries have, especially with print materials. So it's kind of describing, the current activity for libraries, or past transactions. So, it's useful, it's necessary, but it's important to look beyond that. How can libraries build into their automation systems more dynamic and engaging technologies in order to be able to interact with their users more like, you already see happening in the business world, for example, where there's a lot of anticipation of what a user might want. If you have interest in this area, you might also be interested in materials in this area and so forth. So those are just common assumptions that are more difficult to implement in the library world, but we're seeing more of that. How can you go from, treating each user kind of the same to kind of considering each one according to their interest, language, and culture? And so I think that's an important movement that we're seeing, in the library sector. And this is an area where public libraries are advancing faster than academic libraries. So this, personalized services is an important area of movement. The most difficult challenge in this area is doing this kind of personalized service, anticipation of interests and needs, while still maintaining the privacy of library users. In the commercial arena, you can do as much as you want regarding data about the patron in order to be able to use artificial intelligence and data mining and data warehousing in order to be able to meet their anticipate their interests. But that is really hard to do in the library context, where there's the utmost regard for the privacy of individuals. So you have to really work a lot harder in order to develop personalized services in the library context than happens in the business context. So how are you able to find the kinds of data out of the current library systems and other types of data sets in order to be able to fulfill that? It's really, really hard. But I think there's an ongoing interest in kind of being more predictive about library users' interests and responsive in the way that libraries provide these services to do more than just kind of the standard transactional services that are involved in the typical library circulation system. How do you communicate with patrons in ways that are interesting and helpful instead of sending out an email blast to every library patron? How do you, kind of send messages to particular groups, and each of those groups are represent specific interests, a given language or dialect, a particular set of authors, a particular genre of interest. How do you identify users and put them in these profiles in ways that you're always sending them new and interesting information? Again, that's something that you see common in the business world. I think libraries want to do more of that, but then with special regard to kind of protecting their privacy outside of the kind of advertising networks that are so common in the commercial sector. So again, that's one of the challenges that I think libraries and those who are developing technology for libraries are working hard to fulfill right now. To use analytics in order to be able to build library collections that are more meaningful, to make sure that libraries are not building a single collection that's divvied up across branches by numbers, but in a more sophisticated way where each branch is populated with materials according to the culture, demographics, language, dialects, and so forth that will be of special interest to those who live and use those materials. So again, bringing another level of sophistication in the way that libraries acquire and deploy collection materials for their communities. And I just can't say enough how important it is that libraries maintain the privacy of those of their users, kind of regardless of what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's to provide more personalized services or to help during the crisis for contact tracing. You see a lot of libraries that are wanting to get involved with that. So how do you collect and use data about library users in ways that fully protect their privacy, which is, one of the fundamental library values? How do you take advantage of technologies like facial recognition? I think that's a highly controversial technology that you see used in society, and its use in libraries can be, is very much a concern and controversial. I think in general, libraries are trying to ensure that the kinds of automatically generated personal identification that happens through facial recognition is somewhat protected from the way that they deal with patron information within their systems. So there's lots of new and interesting technologies emerging, and libraries have to be very thoughtful, very careful, very analytical in the way they adopt these technologies to ensure that they don't violate the policies and practices and values that libraries hold strongly. So I think we're, just to wrap up, left with, a lot of uncertainties as due to the crisis. There, from a lot that I hear, a lot that I read, individuals that I talk to, it all points toward libraries having significantly less budgets in the next few years than they've had in the past. How can a library continue to deliver its services with 20 or 30% less funding? I think some of the technologies we've talked about up until now may help in that arena. So, it's important to increase the impact of the library, even when the funding for staff and equipment and operations will likely be less in the future. It increases the need, the urgency to be able to provide the best technology to support libraries with the most impact and the lowest cost. And I think a lot of that is going to happen through some of these collaborative systems that I emphasized a few minutes ago. Some of the challenges in that transition is that even though these collaborative systems may be more efficient and maybe have lower operational costs per library going forward, that they involve some upfront costs in order to implement. So, I think one of the opportunities is to use maybe whatever emergency funding that a library is able to get during the crisis to invest in the kind of technologies that are going to support it in these more efficient kinds of ways going forward. Regardless, I think the challenges are going to be incredible for libraries as we think about kind of the next phase of life in the business of libraries. There's kind of one more thought that I want to leave you with is that, this has been an important crisis in the world of libraries, but it's been a crisis of a particular kind, a pandemic that has forced libraries to focus on their digital products and services. Future crises may not look like that. They may be different kinds of crises. There may be other kinds of failure of infrastructure that impact digital rather than physical. You know, widespread internet failures, power failures, malware attacks, business failures of companies that provide connectivity and services to libraries. So, we had to be prepared for a variety of different kinds of things that might happen in the future. And my worry is that if we say, well, the pandemic means that libraries have to really focus on digital, that may make us less prepared for a future crisis where it's the digital resources that are involved. So I think it's important as we do crisis planning, as we think about the future, to ensure that there are plenty of alternatives, both in the way that libraries deploy their physical services and digital services so that we can cope with whatever uncertainties may face us in the future. So that's the end of my prepared comments. I think that we have time for some questions.
Muchas gracias, Marshall. Estoy seguro que la información compartida será de mucha utilidad para los bibliotecarios tanto de México como de América Latina. Ahora quisiera leer algunas de las preguntas que hemos recibido. Marshall, do you know any successful case on the appropriation of technologies by users of public libraries during the pandemic?
So, public libraries have been as reactive as possible to the pandemic. this has been a time where public libraries have had to manage during extremely difficult times. So in order to do that, you know, they've had to do a lot of planning, build a lot of processes that first take into consideration the safety of library workers. So, whether or not to be open, how to allow visitors to come into the library, those are just key concerns. And so what technologies and so forth have public libraries used? A lot, a lot of it is the kind of non-technical measures. So, make sure that there's the right kind of plexiglass screens to protect the library worker from coming in contact with patrons. How do you organize the library in ways that allow appropriate social distancing? And then how do you program your technology in order to be able to support all of these different policies? Okay, I'm hearing some. So anyway, it's been a variety of things. It's been a time where it's been more practical than innovative, I would say. But that I think is the way of the world for now. A lot of practical measures.
Another question. As we're expecting big budget cuts during the next few months, what do you consider we should allocate our resources? Maybe collections, ebooks, or software?
So that's the challenge I was mentioning, that there's going to be a lot less funding. So how do you channel that funding in ways that's going to have the longest term impact? Content is expensive, technology is expensive. So many library managers are saying, well, we're going to have to buy less content and invest less in technology. But I think it's important to try to make the kinds of investments that will help the library in the long term, past the short-term crisis. So what I'm seeing is that a lot of libraries are doing as much as they can to get access to more open access content. And then I think that in the area of technology, how do you start implementing kind of better user experience for a library that will help them in the short and long term be more efficient in the way that they deliver their programs and services to their users. So, I'm not so optimistic that I think that a lot of libraries are simply going to have to be dealing with massive cuts, and it's going to be difficult to find, kind of the few things that they could invest in going forward that will help. But again, I think it's the shared infrastructure and the modern digital experience that I think will help libraries kind of get through this.
Thank you. And one last question. In the context of Latin America, how can we personalize our library services?
So, like you say, every region is different, and it depends on where you're starting from. So in Latin America, I think that there is a lot of interest in implementing ever more modern patron-facing technologies in ways that have the ability to provide more personalized services. So part of it is the training attitude and approach of the librarians, and then supporting that would be technology. So how do you, what open source or commercial systems are available in order to be able to move into this realm of personalized and services and modern marketing methods in order to be able to do that. And so I think it's just a matter of kind of making setting some priorities and starting with some of the incremental approaches that will help libraries in Mexico and Latin America kind of begin this change toward personalized services. There are a lot of kind of more expensive commercial library-oriented products and services that do that, but you know, and I think it's important to consider those, and then kind of both look at kind of open access and open source approaches toward accomplishing that, and kind of compare the costs between purchasing commercial services and being able to maybe collectively build some collaborative approaches for the different types of libraries in Mexico and Latin America. So again, I don't have the answer, obviously, off the top of my head of how you could do that, but I think it's, following a variety of approaches of investigation in order to try to meet that goal.
So much, Marshall.
You're welcome.
Muy bien, pues con esto damos término a la participación del profesor Marshall Breeding. De nuevo quisiera agradecer por haber participado con nosotros en estas jornadas mexicanas de biblioteconomía y compartirnos esta información tan valiosa. A continuación, quisiera dar la palabra a mi colega Jorge Castillo, quien nos hablará brevemente sobre algunas de las iniciativas de propuesta de Ex Libris para apoyar a las bibliotecas en este periodo de crisis.
Hola, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Marshall, por tu participación. Bueno, pues yo voy a robarles un par de minutos nada más para presentar o para complementar un poco o alinear un poco lo que veníamos, lo que mostramos ahora a través de nuestro ponente, con lo que Alma puede ofrecer para ustedes, con lo que ProQuest y Ex Libris pueden ofrecer para ustedes. Para ello voy a compartir mi pantalla un momento. Espero que ya la puedan estar observando. Y bueno, como estábamos hablando, el futuro por algunas situaciones nos alcanzó. Estamos ahora ante una situación a nivel global que se ha visto impactado nuestro medio de manera muy importante. Y bueno, para esto nosotros también hemos puesto para ustedes una serie de productos. Están buscando una solución, ProQuest la tiene para ti. Afortunadamente el catálogo de productos que nosotros manejamos es bastante amplio. Tenemos sistemas para casi todo tipo de necesidades de la biblioteca. Más de herramientas de investigación, tenemos gestores de referencias bibliográficas, tenemos la conexión entre nuestro sistema de gestión de bibliotecas y la academia, tenemos un sistema de búsqueda de fondos para la investigación y tenemos nuestros sistemas de descubrimiento como lo son Summon y Primo. En el tema de contenido, bueno, creo que es donde más nos conocen. Tenemos nuestras colecciones de publicaciones periódicas, nuestras colecciones de videos académicos, de tesis y disertaciones y temas de libros que últimamente hemos visto un boom desde el área comercial, se los podemos decir, y ustedes lo están viviendo en sus bibliotecas. La gente está comprando mucho en digital. Dejaron de comprar en físico por obvias razones y se están dando cuenta de que este cambio está sucediendo. A lo mejor un poco obligado o gran parte obligado por el tema de la pandemia, pero también por las facilidades que representan. Los estudiantes a distancia, cada vez hay estudiantes que trabajan, que están en comunidades o que estudian fuera de su comunidad principal, ya sea porque no hay una universidad ahí o porque están viviendo en otro país, están estudiando en su país de origen. Entonces, esa parte es muy importante. En el tema de servicios, bueno, tenemos servicios de digitalización, de valor agregado, de preservación. Y por último, de los que quiero hablar un poco es de los sistemas de gestión y flujo de trabajo. Para eso quisiera mostrarles o hablar de qué es Alma. Alma es una iniciativa que tiene de 2007, no es un producto nuevo, es un producto maduro que se desarrolló con sociedades de bibliotecas que en el mundo están liderando el tema de investigación, el tema de unir o poner a la academia, a la biblioteca en medio o en el punto medular de la academia. Junto con un sistema de descubrimiento que es Primo, tenemos dos, pero Primo va de la mano con Alma. Y bueno, ¿qué es lo que hace Alma? Como ustedes saben, nosotros por ahí hay algunos productos, Marshall lo mencionaba en su presentación, de código abierto y algunos otros que son de paga. Todos estos productos nacieron hace años, hace 20, 25 años, para el tema de gestionar los recursos físicos de la biblioteca. Con el tiempo y con la pandemia hemos visto que los recursos digitales y electrónicos son los que ahora nos ocupan más espacio, nos ocupan más tiempo. Y bueno, esto es lo que justamente Alma tiene. Alma, anteriormente, los ambientes que hoy usamos, incluyendo Aleph, es un sistema integral de gestión de bibliotecas, en donde por un lado tenemos todos los datos de la colección, tenemos la base del conocimiento, tenemos los resolvedores, los link solvers, tenemos un sistema de descubrimiento, tenemos una gestión de recursos electrónicos, el repositorio digital, tenemos el tema de sacar reportes y todo eso se va juntando y se va pegando y se crea un sistema integrado de bibliotecas. Alma es una nueva generación que ya está por definición, es un nuevo ecosistema en donde todas estas soluciones están juntas en una misma plataforma. Como les comentaba, bueno, esto está hecho por diseño, proporciona flujos de trabajo unificados, les permite que sus colaboradores sean mucho más efectivos al momento de toma de decisiones con el tema de análisis y bueno, que tomen decisiones más inteligentes con menor tiempo en la implementación. Entonces, básicamente Alma lo que hace les ayuda en el día a día en casi todas las áreas de la biblioteca, circulación, adquisiciones, desarrollo de colecciones, en fin, todas las actividades que hacemos están gestionadas desde esta plataforma. La interfaz es muy amigable, la interfaz les permite trabajar, tener notificaciones, ver cómo va nuestro trabajo al día a día, qué tengo pendientes de hacer, qué reuniones tengo, es decir, integra todo en una misma solución que les permite tener como mucho más control desde la dirección de bibliotecas y pasando por todos los niveles de la biblioteca. En el tema de analíticos, bueno, es una de las áreas que más nos gusta a nosotros ofrecer, porque hoy en día es donde más adolecen los sistemas. Sacar la información, hay que ponerla en Excel, hay que hacer tablas avanzadas para poder obtener datos y tarda mucho tiempo y muchas veces no hay alguien que se dedique a eso. Tenemos que tomar a alguien de catalogación o a alguien de circulación y tienen que ponerse a hacer este tipo de trabajos. Con Analytics de Alma no sucede así, es muy sencillo, les permite tomar decisiones rápido y basado en evidencias. Este es como se vería, por ejemplo, nuestra plataforma de Alma es un ejemplo. Este es el tablero original. Del lado derecho ustedes van a ver las recomendaciones, usa inteligencia artificial para decirte, oye, este libro ha estado moviéndose mucho, ¿por qué no lo colocas en tal estante? Oye, estos títulos están saliendo muy rápido, ¿por qué no compras más ejemplares? Situaciones de ese estilo, además de administrar todas las compras y todas las adquisiciones, el tema del repositorio es posible tenerlo ahí. En fin, hay una combinación y bueno, nuestro sistema de descubrimiento. Creo que algo que hemos logrado o que hemos sido exitosos y que es un tema fuerte que se comenta en el medio es el tema del descubrimiento neutral. Nosotros podemos garantizar y mostrar a través de una presentación el algoritmo que utilizan nuestros descubridores para encontrar el artículo o la fuente con mayor relevancia. No importa la fuente, no importa quién lo tiene, sino qué es lo más importante según lo que yo estoy buscando. Creo que eso todos lo buscamos, todos lo necesitamos y muchas veces en nuestras bibliotecas desafortunadamente no lo tenemos al 100%. Por último, quiero hablarles de la parte de libros, que es como les comentaba, un tema que también hemos tenido. Quiero pasar el tiempo, todavía vamos bien. Nuestra plataforma es eBook Central, muchos ya la conocen. En algún momento muchos la tenían sin ser usuarios de ProQuest, lo tenían a través de otro proveedor que tenía alojado ahí su contenido. Y bueno, conocen eBook Central, es una plataforma que ha sido premiada muchas veces. Puedo hablar de muchas cosas que están en el medio, pero de manera personal como usuario es una plataforma muy amigable para el usuario, es una plataforma muy fácil de administrar y que además permite, nuestro modelo de negocios les permite a ustedes hoy en día con este sistema poder adquirir los libros en el modo que más les convenga. Tenemos la clásica suscripción en donde tenemos una colección que es la más completa, que se llama Academy Complete. De hecho, es la primera colección a suscripción que se generó en el mundo. De ahí vinieron las demás, pero la primera que existió, es Academy Complete. Tenemos un modelo de DDA, o adquisición bajo demanda, que es un poco jugar con el tema de adquisición basada en evidencia. ¿Qué diferencia tiene? Para comprar basados en evidencias tenemos que abrir un periodo, esperar un periodo, que los usuarios lo utilicen y con base en eso tomar decisión. Eso lleva un tiempo. Hoy en día necesitamos actuar rápido, utilizar el presupuesto, si es que lo tenemos aún. Lo que hace el DDA es abrimos la plataforma, ustedes pueden ver los libros y detonan ciertos elementos. Si el usuario utilizó más de 5 minutos el título, si el usuario quiso descargar el título, les manda una alerta y la pueden hacer mediada o no mediada. Es decir, hubo un caso de éxito en Chile en donde se dejó abierto y entonces si el usuario lo iba a comprar, se compraba en automático. Y se dejó así abierto sin avisar a la comunidad, porque si no todos iban a ir a comprar. Y entonces la biblioteca se aseguró de comprar realmente los títulos que los usuarios necesitan. Pero puede ser mediado, puedes llamarle una alerta a cada jefe de biblioteca o puede llevarle una alerta a la gente de adquisiciones y entonces ahí decidir qué se compran. Y por último, bueno, el acceso a perpetuidad, que es algo que se está utilizando también mucho últimamente. Nuestro modelo de a perpetuidad tiene 4 diferentes usuarios, el usuario simple o de un usuario, 3 usuarios, estos los pueden usar simultáneamente. Tenemos un usuario llamado acceso no lineal, que esto sucede cuando las editoriales no quieren brindar un acceso multiusuario, pero brindan este acceso. Ustedes compran un acceso que les da entre 200 y 325 accesos al año, y entonces si 7, 8 personas utilizan el libro al mismo tiempo, aunque sea solo un usuario, lo pueden utilizar. Se utilizan 7 de esos 200. Y entonces muchas veces el título se utiliza un semestre o un parcial, y entonces, ¿para qué compro un multiusuario? Pues si no lo hay en ese modelo, ¿para qué compro 3, 6, 9? Si puedo comprar uno solo, y entonces en ese parcial se utilizará, no sé, supongamos que 4 grupos de a 30 lo usan, bueno, estamos hablando de que 120, 150 usuarios lo tendrían, y después el título bajaría en su uso, entonces los 200 o 325 accesos alcanzarían perfecto para poder cubrir la demanda, y a los 365 días se renuevan estos 200 o 325 usuarios. ¿Qué podría pasar en el peor de los casos? Que se acaben los usuarios, los accesos antes de los 365 días. Bueno, se puede comprar otro usuario y al final también se renovará cada 365 días, y el modelo que más estamos buscando es el acceso ilimitado, para que no importa el número de usuarios que quieran utilizar el libro, se pueda llevar. Nuestra eBook Central es una plataforma a nivel global, como les decía, multipremiada. Hoy estamos en más de 110 países, tenemos más de 6,500 clientes, tenemos más de 110 usuarios, administradores diarios y más de 110,000 usuarios a nivel global. Un paréntesis del que quiero utilizar, Marshall hablaba un poco de la colaboración entre bibliotecas. eBook Central permite trabajar entre consorcios, permite hacer compras a nivel consorcial, para que uno compre y todos tengan acceso. Hay ciertos parámetros que se tienen que revisar, pero bueno, eso se puede hacer. Por otro lado, también mencionarles que en el tema del sistema de gestión de bibliotecas, como bien lo decía Marshall, hay algunos que son de código abierto que son muy buenos, pero hoy en día no alcanzan o no son suficientes para lo que tenemos o lo que la biblioteca busca. Les comentaba que, por ejemplo, de la lista del ranking de QS a nivel global, los primeros usuarios hoy en día están con Alma como su sistema de gestión de bibliotecas. Y también es importante mencionar que también Alma puede trabajar de manera colaborativa. Él puso en un slide las infraestructuras que están utilizando o que están compartiendo este sistema, y hablaba de varios ejemplos, de Orbis, de WELF, del sistema de Universidades de California, del sistema CULAC, del sistema de la Universidad de Georgia. Yo les puedo decir que Wisconsin, California, Orbis, CULAC, entre otros, hoy en día utilizan Alma. Es decir, ese es el sistema que están utilizando para trabajar en conjunto. Entonces, aquí tenemos en nuestra región, tenemos AMBAC, tenemos algunas otras asociaciones, tenemos consorcios, tenemos el Consorcio Nacional, a nivel América Latina tenemos el CIFDI, tenemos los consorcios regionales. Entonces, acérquense con nosotros, podemos encontrar esta solución. Tenemos un mindset de que el producto, por ser de paga, es costoso, y muchas veces hay que pensar que esto está en la nube, es seguro, ya no se gastan en servidores, y entonces eso les da también muchos beneficios. Cualquier duda que tengan, yo les pido por favor que nos contacten a este correo, soportelatam@proquest.com, en donde podemos agendar una reunión con el account manager encargado de su territorio para poder presentarles un poco más a fondo el tema de libros, el tema de Alma, y teniendo en cuenta que hoy en día la pandemia nos ha impactado, hay una iniciativa para apoyar a los clientes de América Latina llamada Alma Now. Pregunten por ella en el correo si es que están interesados. en donde, bueno, el tema comercial todavía tiene algún tipo de beneficio por estar en la parte de América Latina. Les agradezco muchísimo, se me ha agotado el tiempo. Gracias a Lambac por invitarnos, gracias a Marshall por participar y un saludo a todos. Espero que estén bien de salud ustedes, su familia, su comunidad. Les mando un abrazo y les reitero mi agradecimiento.
Pues muchas gracias al equipo de ProQuest. También muchísimas gracias al profesor Marshall Breeding por su excelente y muy docta presentación. Lo apreciamos muchísimo. Y también a Mili Bugarín por su moderación. Y bueno, me disculpo de no haber presentado a César Gallegos, quien es director regional de marketing, también por su moderación. Y procederemos a entregar unas constancias de participación por esta excelente sesión. Cedo la palabra a la maestra Fabiola Elena Rosales, quien es secretaria general de Lambac, para que haga este acto de entrega.
Gracias, Julio. Thank you, Dr. Marshall Breeding, for your excellent keynote. We think, as you, we have to work within a collaborative infrastructure between libraries and library systems. Thank you, Cesar Gallegos, for your comments, and Mili Bugarin for the translation. On behalf of the Mexican Librarians Association, I give you this certificate of your extraordinary participation in our annual meeting. Dr. Marshall Breeding, Cesar Gallegos, and Mili Bugarin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Pues no nos queda sino agradecer a todos nuestros televidentes su audiencia, su asistencia a estas jornadas en la sesión matutina, y les recordamos que a las 4 de la tarde tenemos la continuación de los trabajos de este segundo día de las 51 jornadas mexicanas de biblioteconomía, en donde en esa sesión se tocarán dos temas muy interesantes, uno sobre aspectos legales en los tiempos de la pandemia de los servicios, y también un tema sobre realidad virtual. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su presencia y nos vemos un poco más tarde. Hasta pronto.
Adiós.